The U.S. administration can tell Erdogan to get the Hamas out of Istanbul as a show of some sort of initial accommodation, initial goodwill?
He's now pretty publicly wedded to Hamas and to his relationship with Hamas. But you can't have any conversation like that with the Turks until the United States stops supporting the PKK. This is the enemy of all Turks. The vast majority of Kurdish Turks see the PKK as their enemy, and the United States is building it up on their border. So if the Americans come and say, "What are you doing with Hamas?" the first question that any Turk is going to ask is, "What are you doing with the PKK?"
Welcome to JCFA's Mideast Insight. I'm Dan Diker, president of the Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs. It's a delight and a privilege to have here in Jerusalem at the JCFA Dr. Michael Doran, who is the head of the Mideast Center at the Hudson Institute in Washington, D.C. Mike, how great to have you with us here in Jerusalem, all the way from D.C.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thank you.
Really, there are two critical issue briefs that we need to discuss in the very few minutes that we have. One is the issue of the Palestinian, the obsession with the Palestinian issue in Washington. Fundamental shift now with the Trump administration coming in, Biden administration out. But the Palestinian issue has really become the Dybbuk. It's become the obsession through which everyone sees the entire regional Middle East crisis.
Yeah, you know, it was resurrected during the Biden administration. I believe that on October 7th, really that evening, the administration agreed among themselves, the senior figures in the Biden administration came to the conclusion that they had two war goals. One was to maintain the engagement of Iran, not to let the war destroy the Iran engagement, and number two, to prevent the Israeli right from benefiting from the war. And the way to do that was to insist that the war should end with a two-state solution, a revitalized two-state solution.
Was extraordinary because what Hamas taught the world on October 7th is that the so-called two-state solution really was only an empty slogan and had no reality to it because, as they called it, the Al-Aqsa flood, referring to the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, was a continuation of the ideologically, religiously fueled argument that they had to destroy the Jews and the Jewish state.
You know, the two-state solution is based on the notion that really all that the Hamas is fighting over is the results of the 1967 war, when clearly they're still fighting over the results of the 1948 war.
So the question now is, how do we reorient the narrative in Washington, where the notion of a Palestinian state beyond what the Palestinian Authority already rules, or sort of rules, in areas A and B of Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, the understanding in many circles in Washington is that at the end of this jihad, if there is an end to jihad, and I think both of us as students of the Middle East know there really isn't an end to jihad, there will be some sort of sovereign or semi-sovereign Palestinian state. That is a threat to U.S. national security interests, I would submit to you.
It's not going to happen. The American interest is that Israel have permanent control of the Jordan Valley, permanent security control of the Jordan Valley,
and Judea and Samarian hilltops as well.
Yes, and that's not acceptable to the Palestinian Authority in any way. So, and the Israeli public after October 7th is against a two-state solution. It's just not politically viable. It's not going to happen.
So how do you change the narrative? And what operatively? And you yourself, as an intellectual, as a strategist, former senior White House official, former Pentagon official, you understand strategic and defense and security narratives. How do we reorient this conversation away from what we call the Palestinian issue first to Iran first and its proxies first?
I think the United States is where U.S. policy is where this all begins, and the U.S. policymakers need to talk about Iran first and foremost. They need to present October 7th as an Iranian as an Iranian battle, not just against Israel, but against America and the American order in the region. And they need to stop talking about a two-state solution, because it's not realistic. We need to bring American policy into alignment with reality.
What you're saying is realistic, Mike, going beyond the Palestinian issue in the few minutes that we have, is to reconsider how Israel, the United States, and the Western Alliance manage the relationship with Turkey. I mean, you've been a minority voice, frankly, in Washington and among discussions of the Western Alliance that Turkey today is a power that can be, the relationship with which can be managed far more than is understood certainly in Jerusalem in security circles.
Yeah, I believe that there is an accommodation that can be made between the Turks and the Israelis. A quiet accommodation. I don't think there's going to be a Catholic wedding between the Turks and the Israelis. There's a lot of distance between them, including on the question of Gaza and the Palestinian question. But the major security interests of the Turks and the major security interests of the Israelis are fully compatible. They, in fact, I think they overlap. And a wise American policy can accentuate the overlapping, can accentuate the shared interests between Turkey and Israel, and minimize the friction. That's the goal of, that should be the goal of American policy, to minimize the friction, to be the buffer between Ankara and Jerusalem.
And that's because, in your view, the Trump administration has a lot of leverage over Ankara at this juncture, and can use that leverage positively in order to create a modus vivendi between Israel and Turkey.
President Erdogan wants investment in Syria. He wants investment in Turkey. He wants a solution to the PKK problem that he has coming from Syria, and that is the alliance of the United States with the PKK in the form of the SDF. So he has a lot of priorities on his agenda, way ahead of Gaza or any claims he has against the Israelis. And the gateway to the solution to his problems is an agreement with the United States.
Yeah, one of the things that you've mentioned is that in Turkey, where the Turkish military in the Kemalist period has always been sort of the protector of democracy and the protector of national security of Turkey, and we've discussed that that quality of the army is not gone altogether, that in fact it can be Erdogan, as anti-Israel and perhaps quite anti-Semitic as he is, this accommodation can be made because Turkey is not lost to what many understand to be a complete neo-Ottoman reality.
The Turks have the Russians to the north. They have the Iranians to the east. They're in the Balkans. They're in the Caucasus. They're in the Middle East all at once. The Turkish state is a huge balancing machine, and this means that the Turkish military is very prudent. It isn't looking, the generals in the Turkish army are not looking for a conflict with Israel. This is the last thing on their mind.
Dr. Mike Doran, head of the Middle East Center at Hudson in Washington, D.C., former senior Pentagon and White House official and a dear friend of the JCFA. Thanks so much for joining us on Middle East Insight.
Thanks for having me.